I watched the hurricane warning scroll across my phone screen for the third time that Tuesday morning, and instead of feeling the usual pre-storm anxiety, I felt prepared. After all, I had just installed a brand new generator in my backyard last month, complete with proper permits from the city of Jacksonville, Florida. What I didn't expect was the knock on my door at 7 in the morning from Patricia Hendricks, president of the Magnolia Springs Homeowners Association, flanked by two other board members I vaguely recognized from the quarterly meetings I usually tried to avoid. "Mr. Walker, we need to discuss your generator," Patricia said before I could even finish saying good morning. She was a woman in her mid-50s with that particular haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and a clipboard that she wielded like a weapon. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval, and her eyes were already scanning past me into my house as if looking for other violations. I blinked, still holding my coffee mug. "My generator, what about it?" "It's a violation of our HOA covenants, Section 12, subsection 4, regarding outdoor equipment and aesthetic standards," she recited from memory, not even bothering to check her clipboard. "You never submitted an architectural review request, and even if you had, we would have denied it. The unit is visible from the street and creates an eyesore for the neighborhood." The woman to her left, whose name tag read Deborah Vice President, nodded vigorously. "We take neighborhood property values very seriously, Mr. Walker. This isn't personal. There's a Category 3 hurricane coming in less than 48 hours, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I got all the city permits. The generator is there for emergencies." Patricia's expression didn't soften one bit. "The HOA covenants supersede your personal convenience, Mr. Walker." "We've had complaints from neighbors." "What neighbors?" "Mrs. Chen next door helped me pick out the model. The Robinsons across the street asked me for the contractor's number." "Anonymous complaints," Patricia said smoothly, "which we're obligated to investigate. You have 24 hours to remove the generator or face fines of $250 per day until compliance is achieved." I felt my jaw clench. "You want me to remove my emergency generator right before a hurricane? The HOA rules don't pause for weather, Mr. Walker. If you had followed proper procedures, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She handed me a formal violation notice, already printed and signed. 24 hours. Good day." They walked away before I could formulate a response that wouldn't involve words I'd regret. I stood there in my doorway, violation notice in hand, watching them climb into Patricia's pristine white Lexus. The irony wasn't lost on me that Patricia lived in the largest house in the subdivision, the one with the elaborate fountain in the front yard that violated about 6 different water conservation recommendations. But apparently, that was acceptable while my safety equipment wasn't. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, David Chen. "Did the HOA just leave your house? They came by yesterday asking questions about your generator." I called him immediately. "Dave, what did they ask you?" Patricia wanted to know if the noise bothered us, if we thought it was ugly, stuff like that. He sounded apologetic. I told her we didn't mind at all, that we were actually grateful someone on the block was prepared. She didn't like that answer. "She's giving me 24 hours to remove it." "You're kidding. With Hurricane Melissa coming," completely serious, "said it violates aesthetic standards." Dave was quiet for a moment. "Ken, that's insane. Half the neighborhood is going to lose power. You know how these storms are." I did know. I'd lived in Jacksonville for 15 years, and I'd sat through enough power outages to know that the electric company would prioritize hospitals and emergency services first. Residential neighborhoods like ours could be without power for days, sometimes over a week. That's exactly why I'd spent $5,000 on a quality generator that could keep my refrigerator, freezer, and a few essential circuits running. I'm going to call my lawyer, I said. This can't be legal. Let me know if there's anything we can do, Dave offered. Linda and I will back you up if you need statements. I spent the next few hours on the phone. My lawyer, Tom Brennan, listened to the situation and sighed heavily. Ken, here's the problem. HOAs in Florida have broad authority. If your covenants say you need approval for outdoor installations, they technically have grounds. Even for emergency equipment, even then. Now we could fight it, argue that safety supersedes aesthetics, but that's going to take time. Months, probably. We'd need to file an injunction, and with the hurricane coming, no judge is going to hear this case in the next 2 days. So what do I do? You have 3 options. Remove it and comply, which I don't recommend given the circumstances. Pay the fines and fight it later. Or ignore them completely and deal with the legal consequences after the storm passes. I looked out my window at the generator sitting beside my house. It wasn't even that visible. I'd positioned it behind a landscaping screen, and it was the same beige color as my house. This was pure power tripping from Patricia, and I knew it. I'm keeping it, I said. Let them fine me. We'll deal with it after the hurricane. Document everything, Tom advised. Every interaction, every notice. If this goes to court, we'll want a record. By Wednesday morning, Hurricane Melissa's projected path had shifted slightly east, putting Jacksonville directly in the crosshairs. The grocery stores were mobbed. Gas stations had lines around the block, and hardware stores had sold out of plywood and batteries days ago. I spent the morning securing my outdoor furniture and checking my generator one more time. I'd filled 5 gas cans and stored them properly in my shed. I was as ready as I could be. At 2 in the afternoon, another knock. This time it was a different HOA board member, a man named Robert who I'd actually played golf with once. He looked uncomfortable. Ken, I'm supposed to give you this. He handed me another notice. It's a formal fine assessment. Patricia sent me because the 24 hours are up. You guys are really doing this. For what it's worth, I voted against it, Robert said quietly. 3 of us did, but Patricia and Deborah pushed it through. They say it's about maintaining standards, but I think this is ridiculous timing. What's their problem with me anyway? I barely interact with the HOA. Robert glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. Between you and me, Patricia's been on a power trip lately. She's up for re-election next month, and she's trying to prove she's tough on violations. You're not the only one getting targeted. She cited the Garcias for their fence being 2 inches too tall, and the Patels for having the wrong shade of white on their mailbox. That's insane. Yeah, well, she's got Deborah and that new board member, Linda, backing her up. They've got the majority. He shifted his weight. Look, I shouldn't be saying this, but keep your generator. Pay the fines if you have to, but keep your family safe. That's more important than Patricia's ego. After Robert left, I checked the weather updates again. Melissa had strengthened to a Category 4. The governor had declared a state of emergency. Mandatory evacuations were in effect for coastal areas, and inland neighborhoods like ours were being told to shelter in place. The storm was expected to make landfall Thursday night. I texted my girlfriend Sarah, who lived across town. You coming over here or staying at your apartment? Coming to you. Your place is safer and you actually have a generator. Leaving work now. Store shelves are empty everywhere. Sarah Chen arrived around 5, her car loaded with supplies. No relation to my neighbor Dave, but just as practical and level-headed. She'd been a nurse at Baptist Medical Center for 8 years, and she didn't panic easily. So the HOA is really fining you, she asked as we carried her bags inside. $250 a day, apparently. During a hurricane. That's sociopathic. That's Patricia Hendricks. Sarah had heard me complain about the HOA before. She'd been with me when I got cited for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, despite the fact that it was because the collection truck had missed my house, and I'd left them out hoping they'd return. The fine had been $100, which I'd paid just to avoid the hassle. Thursday morning brought an eerie calm. The wind had picked up, but the real storm wouldn't hit until evening. Most of my neighbors had either evacuated or were hunkered down. I saw Dave Chen putting the last of his shutters up. The Robinsons across the street had left yesterday to stay with family in Atlanta. At noon, my power flickered. At 1, it went out completely. I waited about 30 minutes to see if it would come back, then went outside and started my generator. The engine roared to life, smooth and reliable. Within minutes, I had power running to my refrigerator, freezer, a few lights, and the Wi-Fi router. Sarah and I were set. The storm hit around 7 that evening with a fury that rattled the windows and tested the shutters. Wind howled like a living thing, and rain came down so hard, it sounded like gravel hitting the roof. Sarah and I stayed away from windows, monitoring the weather updates on our phones while we still had internet. The generator hummed steadily outside, barely audible over the storm. Around 9, I heard something over the wind. It sounded like knocking. I looked at Sarah. "Did you hear that? Someone's at the door," she said, incredulous. In this weather, I went to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing on my covered porch, soaked despite the overhang, was Patricia Hendricks. She was alone, which was unusual for her. I opened the door a crack. "Mr. Walker, I need to speak with you," she shouted over the wind. "We're in the middle of a hurricane, Patricia. I'm aware. This will only take a moment." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She stood in my entryway, dripping water onto my tile floor, and I noticed her usual composure was cracked. Her hair was plastered to her head, and her hands were shaking slightly. "I need to request a temporary arrangement," she said, speaking quickly. "The power's out in the entire neighborhood, and I have several $100s worth of food in my refrigerator and freezer. I was hoping we could run an extension cord from your generator to my house. Just for the major appliances. I'd pay you for the gas, of course." I stared at her. "You're asking to use the generator you told me to remove. This is an emergency situation, Mr. Walker. I'm willing to overlook our previous disagreement. Overlook it." "Patricia, you fined me $250. "That fine still stands," she said, lifting her chin. "The violation occurred before the storm, but I'm willing to be reasonable about current circumstances." Sarah had come to stand behind me. "You've got to be kidding," she said. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "This is between Mr. Walker and the HOA. Actually, this is between you and basic human decency," Sarah shot back. "You tried to force him to remove his emergency equipment during a hurricane warning, and now you want to benefit from it. I'm not asking for charity." I said I'd pay for the gas. I felt a surge of anger that I struggled to keep in check. "Patricia, my generator can barely handle my house's essential systems. I don't have the capacity to run power to your place, which is what, 4 houses down. And even if I did, you spent the last 2 days making my life difficult over this exact piece of equipment. So you're refusing to help a neighbor in need. I'm refusing to help someone who created their own problem while trying to make mine worse. You could have prepared. You chose not to." "That's not my responsibility." Her face flushed red. "This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that makes HOA oversight necessary. When this storm is over, Mr. Walker, You'll be receiving additional fines for failure to comply, and I'll be recommending to the board that we pursue legal action to force removal of that generator. Do what you need to do, Patricia. Now get out of my house." She left, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. Sarah let out a low whistle. Well, that was something. I can't believe she actually showed up here. She's desperate and entitled. Bad combination. The storm raged through the night. At its peak, around 2 in the morning, it sounded like the house might come apart. I'd lived through hurricanes before, but Melissa was testing the limits. A tree came down somewhere nearby with a crash that I felt through the floor. Sarah grabbed my hand, and we sat together on the couch, listening to the chaos outside while my generator kept the lights on and our phones charged. By morning, the worst had passed. We emerged to find the neighborhood transformed. Trees were down everywhere. Roof shingles littered the streets like confetti. Someone's trampoline had ended up in the Chen's front yard. Power lines were down on the next block over, and I could see a utility pole leaning at a dangerous angle, but my house was fine. The generator had run all night without a hitch. My food was safe, and I had the ability to charge phones and power essential equipment. Dave and Linda Chen came over around 8, and I helped them transfer some of their frozen food to my freezer since they'd lost power and didn't have a backup system. "The whole neighborhood's going to be out for days," Dave said, surveying the damage. "Power companies saying maybe a week for residential areas. You guys are welcome to use the generator for charging phones or whatever you need," I offered. "I've got plenty of gas stored." Throughout Friday, neighbors started trickling by. The elderly couple at the end of the street, the Johnsons, needed to charge Mr. Johnson's medical equipment. A family with 2 small kids needed to warm up baby formula. I helped everyone I could, running extension cords and managing the generator's load to make sure I didn't overload the system. Patricia's house remained notably absent from the visitors. I could see her through her windows occasionally, and once I saw her leave in her car, probably trying to find ice or supplies. Saturday morning brought another visit, but this time it wasn't Patricia. It was Deborah, the vice president, accompanied by the 3rd board member who'd supported Patricia, a woman named Linda Morrison, who I'd never actually spoken to before. "Mr. Walker, we'd like to discuss a community arrangement," Deborah began. She had the artificial smile of someone who'd practiced this speech. Given the extended power outage, the HOA board thought it would be beneficial if you could provide generator access to board members' homes. We'd be managing essential HOA functions during the crisis, and it's important that we maintain operational capability. "Essential HOA functions," I repeated flatly. "Yes. Communications, documentation, emergency coordination." "The emergency coordination that consists of what exactly?" Linda spoke up. "We're monitoring the situation and providing guidance to homeowners." "Right. And you need my generator for that. We'd be willing to suspend your current fines during the period of assistance," Deborah offered, as if this was a generous concession. Sarah had walked up behind me again. She'd taken to staying close whenever HOA members appeared, which I appreciated. "Let me get this straight," she said. "You want him to power your homes so you can do what? Send emails. You all have cars. You can charge your phones in your cars. You don't need a home generator to coordinate anything." "This really isn't your concern," Linda said icily. "It is when I'm staying here," Sarah replied, "and when I'm watching the HOA try to extort someone for being prepared while they weren't." "Extortion is a strong word," Deborah said, but she looked uncomfortable. "What would you call it?" I asked. You fine me for having emergency equipment, then ask to use that equipment, and now you're offering to suspend the fines you never should have issued in the first place if I help you out. That sounds like extortion to me. The fines were legitimate under HOA covenants, Deborah insisted. Then they stand regardless of whether I help you or not. You can't have it both ways. Either I violated the rules and deserve the fines, or I didn't and you're using them as leverage. Which is it? The two women exchanged glances. Finally, Linda said, "We'll be noting your refusal to assist in community recovery efforts in the official record." "You do that," I said. "And I'll be noting that the HOA board tried to leverage illegitimate fines for personal benefit." My lawyer's going to love that. They left, and Dave Chen, who'd been watching from his yard, came over. "They actually tried to bribe you with your own fine money, apparently. That's got to be illegal." "I'm pretty sure it is, actually. Tom's going to have a field day with this." I called my lawyer that afternoon. Cell service was spotty, but I got through eventually. Tom listened to my account of both visits and made interested noises. "Ken, document all of this. Write down everything they said when they said it, who was present. If you have any witnesses, get statements. If they put anything in writing, save it. This is starting to look like a pattern of behavior that goes beyond simple HOA overstep." "What are we talking about?" "Harassment, potentially. Also abuse of authority, possible extortion, depending on how we frame it. The fact that they're trying to leverage fines for personal benefit is a problem for them. HOAs have legal authority, but they can't use it for individual gain. So what do we do? For now, keep helping your neighbors like you've been doing. Don't help the board members. Document everything. When the power's back and things settle down, we're going to have a very serious conversation with the HOA about their conduct." Sunday brought more of the same. More neighbors stopping by for help, more generator runtime, more gas consumption. I'd gone through 3 of my 5 gas cans. The Johnsons needed help again with medical equipment. A family 2 streets over had heard about my generator and walked over with a cooler, asking if they could store some insulin that needed refrigeration. I said yes, obviously, but I also noticed something else. People were starting to talk. The neighborhood had always been reasonably friendly, but the hurricane had brought everyone outside and together in a way that normal life didn't. Stories were being shared. And the story about the HOA trying to fine me for the very generator that was now helping people was spreading fast. Mrs. Johnson told me that Patricia had stopped by their house asking if they'd noticed any noise pollution from my generator before the storm. Mrs. Johnson had apparently told her that they were grateful for the generator because it was keeping her husband's oxygen concentrator charged. The Garcias, who I'd only met in passing before, came by to tell me that they'd received a citation for their fence right before the storm. And now, part of that fence had been destroyed by fallen trees. They'd called Patricia asking if the HOA emergency fund could help with repairs, and she'd told them that the emergency fund was only for common areas, not individual properties. She told me the fence violation was suspended until repairs could be made, Mr. Garcia said. But that we'd need to submit new architectural plans before rebuilding and pay a review fee during a hurricane recovery. Can you believe that? I could believe it. It was completely in character. Monday morning, the power company released a statement saying that residential power restoration would take at least another 5 to 7 days. My generator was still running strong, but I was down to my last 2 gas cans. I needed to find more fuel, which was going to be challenging since most gas stations were still without power themselves. I was planning a trip to try to find gas when Robert, the board member who'd expressed sympathy earlier, showed up. He looked tired and frustrated. "Ken, I need to give you a heads up. Patricia's calling an emergency board meeting tonight. She's going to propose a motion to put a lien on your property for unpaid fines and non-compliance. She can't do that. It's been less than a week. Normally, no. But she's arguing that the emergency situation requires decisive action, and that your refusal to help the board constitutes obstruction of HOA functions. That's insane. I know. I'm voting against it. So is Marcus, the other guy who voted against the initial fine. But Patricia, Deborah, and Linda have the majority. 3 votes to 2, they can pass it. Can they actually enforce a lien? Eventually, if you don't pay the fines. It would take months to process, but it would go on your property record, make it harder to sell or refinance. I felt the anger building again. This is retaliation, pure and simple. I agree, which is why I'm here telling you if you have a lawyer, you might want to give them a call. I called Tom immediately. He was less calm than usual when I explained the situation. They're doing what? During a declared state of emergency. Robert says they're calling it emergency measures. Ken, this is beyond aggressive. This is vindictive. And honestly, they might be walking into a legal trap of their own making. Here's what I want you to do. Draft a formal letter to the HOA board, stating that any actions taken against you constitute retaliation for your refusal to provide personal benefits to board members during an emergency. Reference both Patricia's visit and Deborah's visit. State clearly that you've been assisting other community members, but that board members specifically requested preferential treatment. Send it certified, but also email it tonight before their meeting. Create a record. Will that stop them? Probably not, but it'll give us ammunition. If they proceed with the lien after receiving that letter, it's going to be very hard for them to claim this isn't retaliation. I spent the afternoon drafting the letter with Tom's help over a crackling phone connection. Sarah helped me refine the language. By 5 that evening, I'd emailed it to all 5 board members with read receipts requested. All 5 opened it within 30 minutes. At 7, I walked over to Patricia's house, where the board meetings were usually held. Technically, HOA meetings were supposed to be open to homeowners, and I wanted to see this firsthand. Patricia answered the door with a frozen smile. Mr. Walker, this is a closed emergency session. HOA bylaws state that all board meetings must allow homeowner observation unless discussing personnel or legal matters. Which is this? Her smile got tighter. We'll be discussing your violations, so it could be considered a legal matter. Then I have a right to be present for any discussion that affects my property. Florida Statute 720.303, if you want to discuss me, I get to be there. Tom had briefed me on this. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Robert had appeared behind her. Let him in, Patricia. He's right about the statute. She stepped aside with obvious reluctance. The meeting was in her formal dining room, which was immaculate despite the power outage. She had a battery-powered lantern providing light, and papers were spread across the table. I could see my name on several of them. The 5 board members took their seats, and I sat in one of the chairs along the wall. Patricia called the meeting to order with clear irritation in her voice. We're here to discuss ongoing violations by Mr. Kenneth Walker of Property Code Regulations. As you all know, Mr. Walker installed an unauthorized generator and has refused to remove it despite formal notice and assessed fines. I'd like to note my opposition to these proceedings, Robert said immediately. This is inappropriate timing and appears retaliatory. Noted, Patricia said curtly. Mr. Walker's violations stand regardless of timing. He was given proper notice and chose to disregard it. We've now received a letter from Mr. Walker making baseless accusations about board conduct. They're not baseless, I said from my chair. You came to my house asking to use the generator. Then Deborah and Linda came offering to suspend the fines if I helped the board. I have witnesses to both conversations." Deborah's face flushed. "That's a mischaracterization. We were discussing community cooperation." "No, you were trying to use HOA authority to get personal benefits and then leverage my own fine money as a bargaining chip. That's abuse of authority." "This is exactly why homeowners shouldn't be present for these meetings," Linda muttered. "Actually, this is exactly why we have transparency requirements," Marcus, the other board member, spoke up. I hadn't heard him say much before, but he looked annoyed. "Patricia, I received Ken's letter too. If even half of what he's saying is true, we've got a serious problem. You can't solicit personal benefits and then retaliate when someone refuses." "I did no such thing," Patricia snapped. "I asked a neighbor for help during an emergency." "A neighbor you just fined for having the equipment you wanted to use," Marcus shot back. "How does that look?" "It looks like someone trying to help multiple people instead of being selfish," Patricia said. "Mr. Walker has been operating his generator for days, helping various neighbors, but refuses to assist HOA leadership. That's obstructionist. He's helping elderly people with medical equipment and families with children," Robert said. "What exactly do you need a generator for, Patricia? Your food's spoiling." The silence that followed was telling. Patricia's face went rigid. "The HOA president needs to maintain operational capability," she said stiffly. "For what?" Robert pressed. "We're not operating anything. There's nothing to do right now except wait for power restoration and help people where we can, which Ken's been doing without being on the board." "This is beside the point," Linda interjected. "We're here to address ongoing violations. I move that we proceed with placing a lien on Mr. Walker's property for unpaid fines totaling $250 with additional daily fines accumulating." "I second," Deborah said quickly. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said. "We're talking about less than $500 total even with accumulation, and you want to lien his property during a hurricane recovery. Rules don't pause for weather," Patricia said, echoing her earlier statement to me. "All in favor?" Patricia, Deborah, and Linda raised their hands. Robert and Marcus didn't. "Motion carries 3-2, Patricia announced. "Mr. Walker, you'll receive formal documentation of the lien filing within 10 business days. And you'll receive formal legal documentation of my lawsuit against the HOA within 5, I replied, standing up. "This entire meeting is evidence of retaliation, and I'm betting your HOA insurance doesn't cover willful misconduct by board members. Enjoy explaining to your insurance company why you're being sued." I left before anyone could respond. Outside, the neighborhood was dark except for the occasional flicker of generator lights or battery-powered lanterns. I walked back to my house feeling angry but also oddly confident. Patricia had just made a serious mistake, and she'd done it in front of witnesses who disagreed with her. Sarah was waiting up when I got back. How bad was it? They voted to lien the property, 3-2. Can they do that? Technically, yes. Practically, they just handed my lawyer everything he needs to destroy them. I pulled out my phone and called Tom, not caring that it was after 9 at night. Tom answered on the second ring. "Tell me they didn't actually do it. 3 votes to proceed with a property lien." Robert and Marcus voted against it. I was present for the whole meeting. "They conducted an enforcement vote with you in the room after receiving your letter about retaliation." "Yep." Tom actually laughed. "Ken, I've been practicing law for 25 years, and I've never seen an HOA board hand me a case this cleanly. We're going to file for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow to stop the lien. Then we're going to file a lawsuit for harassment, retaliation, and abuse of authority." and I'm going to recommend that you file a complaint with the state about HOA misconduct. What are the chances we win? Based on what you've told me. Very good. HOAs have authority, but they can't use it to retaliate or to extract personal benefits. The fact that Patricia and Deborah both solicited personal use of your generator after fining you for having it is textbook abuse. The fact that they tried to leverage fine suspension as a bargaining chip is worse. And the fact that they proceeded with a lien vote immediately after you refused and sent a letter documenting their conduct shows clear retaliatory intent. What happens to them? Best case for them, they get removed from the board and the HOA has to pay your legal fees. Worst case, if we can prove financial misconduct or fraud, they could face personal liability. The HOA's insurance will probably try to deny coverage if they determine this was willful misconduct, which means Patricia and the others could be paying damages out of their own pockets. I felt a grim satisfaction. Good. Get some sleep. I'll start drafting paperwork in the morning. Tuesday brought gas station lines and frustration. I spent 4 hours waiting to fill my gas cans, but I got it done. The generator had been running for 5 days straight and it needed fuel. While waiting in line, I ran into the Garcias again. "Ken, we heard about the meeting last night," Mrs. Garcia said. "Robert called us. He's calling other homeowners too. He's trying to organize a recall vote for the board." "A recall?" He says what Patricia's doing is out of control. She's not just targeting you. There are 8 active violation citations right now, all issued in the 2 weeks before the hurricane. Robert thinks she's trying to pad her enforcement record before the election. Can he actually recall them? If he gets 20% of homeowners to sign a petition, it forces a special election. He's going door to door. That was interesting. I hadn't considered that the rest of the neighborhood might be as fed up with Patricia as I was, but it made sense. If she was citing people for minor violations while they were trying to prepare for a hurricane, that would make anyone angry. Wednesday, the power company updated their timeline again. 7 to 10 more days for full restoration. My generator was still running, still helping neighbors. The Johnsons, the family with insulin, Dave and Linda Chen, and a rotating cast of other neighbors who needed phone charging or food storage. My house had become an unofficial community center. Thursday morning, Robert showed up with a clipboard. "Ken, I've got 130 signatures on the recall petition. We only needed 42. There's going to be a special election in 3 weeks. That was fast. People are angry. Patricia cited the Thompsons for having their lawn unmowed the week before the hurricane. They'd evacuated early to get their kids out of the storm path. She cited them anyway for violating lawn maintenance standards. That's insane. That's Patricia. Look, I wanted to ask you something. Would you consider running for the board? We need people who understand that the HOA is supposed to serve the community, not lord over it. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know, Robert. I'm not really a meetings and committees kind of person. You've spent the last week helping half the neighborhood with your generator. You clearly care about the community. We need that perspective. Let me think about it." He left and I discussed it with Sarah. She was surprisingly supportive. "You'd be good at it. You're level-headed, you care about people, and you're not on a power trip." That's basically the opposite of Patricia. It's a lot of time commitment. So is dealing with lawsuits against the HOA. Might as well be on the board making sure they don't do stupid things in the first place. She had a point. Friday brought more drama. Patricia, apparently aware of the recall petition, started sending out emails to all homeowners claiming that the recall was being driven by violations scofflaws who didn't want to follow community rules. She specifically mentioned my generator situation, claiming I was refusing to comply with basic aesthetic standards that protected everyone's property values. The email was a mistake. Within hours, responses started flooding in. People defending me, people sharing their own stories of unreasonable citations, people expressing support for the recall. Someone created a neighborhood Facebook group specifically to discuss HOA issues, and it filled up with complaints about Patricia's leadership. Dave Chen forwarded me some of the comments. Patricia cited me for having a garden hose visible from the street, a garden hose. She told me my house number sign was the wrong font. She threatened to fine me because my daughter drew on our driveway with chalk. The neighborhood was in open rebellion, and Patricia had triggered it by trying to defend herself. Saturday, 9 days after the hurricane, power started coming back to parts of the neighborhood. Not my street yet, but nearby areas were getting restored. My generator was still running, but I could see the end in sight. I'd gone through all 5 gas cans twice now, spending hundreds of dollars on fuel, but it had been worth it. Sunday morning, my power came back on. I heard the hum of electricity and saw lights I'd left switched on come to life. I went outside and shut down the generator, giving it a rest after 9 days of continuous operation. It had performed flawlessly. Within an hour, I had another visitor. This time it was Deborah, alone. She looked awful, tired, and stressed. "Mr. Walker, I owe you an apology," she said, standing on my porch. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize I've been following Patricia's lead without really questioning whether what we were doing was right. The generator fine was unreasonable. Asking to use it after fining you was worse, and trying to lien your property was just vindictive. I'm sorry." I studied her. She seemed genuine, but I was wary. "What changed?" My daughter asked me why I was being mean to the nice man who'd been helping people. She's 12. She heard me talking to my husband about the board meeting and she called me out. She said you were like a superhero helping the neighborhood while the HOA was being the villain. That stung. Despite myself, I felt some of the anger drain away. Kids have a way of cutting through the nonsense. They do. "Look, I know you're suing the HOA. I know there's a recall vote coming. I just wanted you to know that I'm not going to fight either one. I'm going to resign from the board, actually. I didn't get into this to harass people or abuse authority. That's not what an HOA should be." What about Patricia and Linda? Patricia's digging in. She thinks she can spin this as a conflict between people who care about property values and people who want chaos. Linda's backing her up. But Robert and Marcus are both supporting the recall, and with me resigning, the board can't really function anyway. We need 5 members for a quorum. "Good," I said, and I meant it. Deborah left, and I felt a small sense of progress. 1 down, 2 to go. Monday, Tom filed our lawsuit against the HOA in Duval County Circuit Court. The complaint alleged harassment, retaliation, abuse of authority, and sought damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and an injunction against any further enforcement actions related to the generator. He also filed our emergency motion to block the property lien. The lawsuit made the local news. A reporter from the Florida Times-Union called me Tuesday morning asking for an interview. I agreed, figuring that public pressure couldn't hurt. The article ran Wednesday with the headline "Hurricane Exposes HOA Overreach. Homeowner Sued After Being Fined for Emergency Generator." It detailed the timeline of events, included quotes from me and from Robert, and even had a statement from Tom about HOA authority limits. Patricia declined to comment, which made her look guilty. The article was shared hundreds of times on social media. Local news channels picked it up. By Thursday, I was getting messages from people I hadn't talked to in years, expressing support and sharing their own HOA horror stories. Friday, the court granted our emergency injunction blocking the lien. The judge's order included language stating that the lien appeared to be retaliatory in nature, and that proceeding with it would cause irreparable harm. Tom called me sounding positively gleeful. "Ken, the judge basically called them out for retaliation in the order. That's huge. It means when we get to the full hearing, we're already starting from a position where the court has acknowledged problematic behavior. When's the full hearing? Not for a few months. These things take time. But honestly, I'm expecting them to try to settle before then. This is not a case the HOA wants to take to trial." The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks out, which would be early November. Robert had organized a slate of 4 candidates to run for the board positions, including himself for president. He asked me again if I'd run, and after discussing it with Sarah, I agreed to run for one of the member-at-large positions. The campaign, if you could call it that, was mostly just people talking to their neighbors. Robert created a simple platform: reasonable enforcement of rules, transparent decision-making, and an HOA that served the community rather than ruling over it. It wasn't complicated, but it resonated. Patricia tried to campaign too, but she was fighting an uphill battle. She sent out mailers about maintaining property values and preventing neighborhood decline, but they came across as tone-deaf after everything that had happened. She held a community meeting that 12 people showed up to, mostly to yell at her about their own violation citations. Linda Morrison dropped out of the race entirely, apparently deciding it wasn't worth the fight. That left Patricia running essentially alone against a slate of 4 candidates backed by most of the neighborhood. The lawsuit moved forward slowly. The HOA's insurance company sent a lawyer who reached out to Tom about settlement discussions. Tom's position was simple: drop all fines and violations against me, pay my legal fees, issue a formal apology, and implement new policies preventing retaliatory enforcement actions. The insurance lawyer said they were considering it. November 3rd was election day for the HOA. We had voting from 10 to 6 at the community center. Turnout was massive, over 70% of homeowners, which Robert said was unprecedented. People were engaged and angry and ready for change. I spent part of the day at the community center, just talking to people who came to vote. The stories I heard reinforced everything I already knew. Patricia had been on a citation spree for months, targeting minor violations and using the HOA as a personal fiefdom. People were tired of it. When the votes were counted that evening, the results were decisive. Robert won the presidency with 82% of the vote. I won my member-at-large position with 76%. The other 2 reform candidates won their races easily. Patricia got 18% of the vote, losing badly. She didn't show up to the results announcement. She sent an email later that night to all homeowners claiming that the election had been compromised by outside influence and misinformation campaigns, but nobody took it seriously. She was done, and everyone knew it. The new board was sworn in at a special meeting the following week. Our first official act was to rescind all pending fines and violations that had been issued in the 60 days before Hurricane Melissa, including mine. Our second act was to implement a new review process for violations that required board discussion before any fines could be issued. Our third act was to establish clearer guidelines about what constituted a legitimate violation versus aesthetic preferences. The HOA's insurance lawyer contacted Tom 2 days later with a settlement offer that met all our demands. The HOA would pay $15,000 to cover my legal fees, issue a formal apology, and the previous board members who'd voted for the lien would be permanently barred from serving in HOA leadership positions. Tom recommended I accept, and I did. The formal apology came at the next community meeting, read by the insurance company's lawyer since Patricia refused to attend. It acknowledged that the generator citation had been inappropriate, that the enforcement actions had been retaliatory, and that the HOA was implementing new policies to prevent similar situations in the future. It wasn't as satisfying as hearing Patricia say it herself, but it was official and public, and that mattered. December brought a sense of normalcy returning to the neighborhood. Power was fully restored. Hurricane debris was cleared. People were repairing damage and getting back to their lives. The new HOA board met monthly and handled business efficiently and fairly. We reviewed 2 legitimate violations, both for seriously overgrown yards that were becoming wildlife problems, and worked with the homeowners to address them without fines. I kept my generator, obviously. In fact, at one of our board meetings, Marcus proposed creating guidelines for generator installations that would establish reasonable aesthetic standards while acknowledging the safety value of having emergency backup power. We passed it unanimously. Within a month, 3 other homeowners had installed generators following the new guidelines. Patricia Hendricks put her house on the market in January. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was moving to a condo community with no HOA. The irony was not lost on anyone. Her house sold in March, and I watched from my window as the moving truck loaded up her possessions. I didn't feel triumphant, exactly. Just relieved that the drama was over. Linda Morrison kept a low profile but stayed in the neighborhood. She never apologized directly to me, but she stopped causing problems, which was good enough. Deborah actually became friendly after her resignation. She and her family attended a neighborhood barbecue in May, and she approached Sarah and me to thank us for not holding a grudge. Her daughter, the 12-year-old who'd called her out, had apparently been following the whole situation and was proud that her mom had admitted she was wrong. Kids really do cut through nonsense. The lawsuit settlement money covered all my legal fees with a few thousand left over, which I donated to the neighborhood emergency fund that Robert had established. The fund was designed to help homeowners with unexpected repairs or emergency situations, the kind of thing an HOA should actually be doing instead of measuring fence heights and counting lawn ornaments. Sarah and I got engaged in June. When we started planning the wedding, she joked that we should have a generator-shaped cake. I told her absolutely not, but I appreciated the humor. The generator itself sat beside my house, properly maintained and ready for the next emergency. It had paid for itself in peace of mind alone. Serving on the HOA board turned out to be less terrible than I'd feared. We met once a month, handled business efficiently, and focused on actual community needs like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events. The drama and power tripping were gone, replaced by boring but functional governance. It was exactly what an HOA should be in August. Hurricane Nathan formed in the Atlantic and started tracking toward Florida. The Weather Service was predicting another major storm, possibly Category 4. The neighborhood response was completely different this time. People prepared early. Several homeowners who'd installed generators asked for advice on operation and maintenance. The HOA sent out helpful information about preparation rather than warnings about violations. And when Nathan did hit, stronger than Melissa had been, my generator ran for 11 days straight. I helped the same neighbors, plus a few new ones. The Johnsons' medical equipment stayed powered. The family with insulin kept their medication safe. Dave and Linda Chen stored their frozen food. And this time, nobody from the HOA showed up asking to plug in because their food was spoiling. Robert had installed his own generator after the election. So had Marcus and several other board members. We'd learned our lessons from Melissa, both about preparation and about leadership. The neighborhood recovered faster from Nathan than from Melissa, partly because we were more prepared and partly because we'd built stronger community connections. The crisis with Patricia and the generator had actually brought people together, creating networks of neighbors who looked out for each other. It wasn't the lesson I'd expected to learn, but it was valuable. 2 years after the generator incident, the HOA was functioning smoothly. Property values had actually increased, not because of strict violation enforcement, but because the neighborhood had become a more desirable place to live. People knew their neighbors. They helped each other. They had an HOA that supported them rather than harassed them. I ran for re-election to the board and won easily. Sarah and I were married by then, living in the same house with the same generator sitting outside. We'd weathered 3 more hurricanes, and each time the generator performed exactly as designed. Patricia's old house had been bought by a young family with 2 kids. They were nice people, friendly and community-minded. I helped them install their own generator in their 2nd year there, making sure it met the HOA guidelines that I'd helped write. They were grateful, and they told me they'd heard stories about the previous owner and the drama surrounding the generator ban. "Everyone says you stood up to the crazy HOA lady," the husband, whose name was Michael, said while we were working on the installation. "That true?" "More or less," I said, though it was more about standing up for common sense than being heroic or anything. "Still, good for you. My last neighborhood had an HOA president who tried to ban holiday decorations. Some people just shouldn't have authority." He was right about that. Some people saw authority as a chance to serve, and others saw it as a chance to control. The difference between those 2 approaches made all the difference in whether a community thrived or suffocated under petty rules and power games. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that first knock on my door before Hurricane Melissa to the settlement and the elections and the reforms, I realized the generator had been just a catalyst. The real issue had been about what kind of community we wanted to live in. Did we want an HOA that saw homeowners as subjects to be regulated and controlled, or one that saw them as members of a shared community with common interests? Patricia had represented the first approach, treating every minor deviation from her vision of perfection as a crisis that needed to be punished. She'd used HOA rules as weapons rather than guidelines, and she'd paid the price when the community rejected that approach. The new board represented the second approach. We enforced rules when they actually mattered, when someone's actions genuinely affected their neighbors or threatened safety or property values. But we didn't cite people for having garden hoses visible from the street, or chalk drawings on driveways or generators that kept the lights on during emergencies. It seemed like common sense, but apparently, common sense wasn't that common when it came to HOA governance. I'd heard horror stories from friends in other neighborhoods about similar power-tripping board members, about ridiculous fines and absurd violations in communities torn apart by petty tyrants with clipboards. We'd been lucky, in a way. Patricia's overreach had been so egregious and so perfectly timed with the hurricane that it had galvanized the entire neighborhood to action. If she'd been slightly more subtle or slightly less vindictive, she might have stayed in power longer, making more people miserable with her arbitrary enforcement. Instead, she'd created the conditions for her own removal by being exactly as unreasonable as possible at exactly the wrong time. And in doing so, she'd accidentally made the neighborhood stronger. The generator still sat beside my house, humming to life whenever the power went out, keeping my family safe and helping my neighbors when they needed it. It was just a piece of equipment, a metal box with an engine and some circuits. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that preparation and community and common sense mattered more than arbitrary rules and aesthetic standards and HOA power games. Every time I looked at it, I remembered Patricia standing on my porch in the middle of a hurricane, soaked and desperate, asking to use the equipment she'd tried to ban. I remembered Deborah offering to suspend my fines in exchange for help, as if my own money was hers to bargain with. I remembered the board meeting where they'd voted to lien my property out of spite and retaliation. And then I remembered everything that had come after. The community response, the recall election, the lawsuit settlement, the reforms, the neighborhood coming together. The new board actually serving instead of ruling. The generators sprouting up in yards all over the subdivision, symbols of preparation and self-reliance and community resilience. It had been a hell of a journey for something that started with a simple attempt to keep my lights on during a storm. But I wouldn't change any of it. Well, maybe I'd skip the part where I had to spend thousands on legal fees and deal with months of stress, but the outcome was worth it. The neighborhood was better. The HOA was better. And I'd learned that sometimes standing up to unreasonable authority, even when it's inconvenient and stressful, creates positive change that extends far beyond your own situation. My generator had kept the lights on during the storm. But the fight that followed had illuminated something more important. The difference between leadership and tyranny, between community and control, between rules that serve people and rules that people serve. And in the end, when you cut through all the drama and the conflict and the legal maneuvering, that was what really mattered. We'd built a community that worked for everyone, not just the people with clipboards and authority complexes. We'd proven that HOAs didn't have to be nightmares of petty regulations and vindictive enforcement. They could actually do what they were supposed to do: maintain common areas, preserve property values through reasonable standards, and create a framework for neighbors to work together for mutual benefit. It wasn't complicated. It just required people in leadership who understood that their job was to serve, not to rule. People who saw their neighbors as equals, not subjects. People who could tell the difference between a legitimate concern and a power trip. I'd never thought I'd end up on an HOA board, fighting to reform it from the inside. Life has a funny way of pushing you into situations you never expected. But sitting on my porch on a warm evening, watching neighbors walk their dogs and kids play in yards, knowing that the community was strong and functional and free from the kind of petty tyranny that Patricia had represented, I felt good about where we'd ended up. The generator sat silently beside my house, waiting for the next storm. And when that storm came, as storms always do in Florida, it would be ready. So would I. So would the neighborhood. We'd learned our lessons well. And somewhere out there, in whatever condo community she'd moved to, Patricia Hendricks was probably measuring someone's mailbox or citing them for having the wrong color welcome mat. But that was their problem now, not ours. We were free.